Hello and welcome to Progress Texas Happy Hour. It's the last podcast of the legislative session. I'm very excited to be here today. I'm Amanda Canadinger with Progress Texas. We had a few good things happen this week with some bad bills dying, but I'm pretty ready for this nightmare to be over. Today, I'm joined by our advocacy manager, Diana Gomez, communications manager, Wesley Story, and senior strategist, Glenn Smith. Hi, and welcome to the happy hour today. So I kind of just wanted to first start off, we're looking ahead. Sine Die, the end of session is Monday. It's Memorial Day. How are you guys going to be celebrating this wonderful holiday? Another question would be, what's your favorite moment from the past couple months?
I think I can go first. I think I might celebrate it by sleeping a bit without thinking that I should check my phone or I don't know. Part of me would feel anxious for going to bed like before midnight or something. I always felt like I've had to wait till after midnight to see what died and to see if anything happened. What are people saying? What are people tweeting? So I'm excited to go to bed a bit early. And I think one of my favorite moments of the session was when we were all able to get together with a bunch of other advocacy organizations with the Trust, Respect, Access Coalition and support a lot of our progressive champions in the House in, trying to block SB 8. That ultimately didn't happen, but it was really great to be able to be in solidarity with all of our partners and be there to support each other and to see each other for the first time, because most of the session has been via Zoom or with each other of us meeting.
A little more face-to-face.
Yeah.
What about you, Glenn? Oh, we have mute.
Unmute, sorry. I was going to catch up on my rest as well, try to clear my head of some of this stuff. I mean, a lot of that's happening is going to require us to fight on, but we could take a day after the session maybe to kick back, settle down. I have an actual favorite moment. It's when I worked with a bunch of the Capitol reporters to restore their access to the House chamber. And we persuaded even the Republicans at the committee level and on the House floor to go along with that. And I think it was a good blow for freedom of the press.
Definitely. Wes, bring it home. What are you going to do to celebrate?
So I will be celebrating on Monday by continuing to follow what is happening, because as we all know, anything can happen. And even on the last day, we're really not sure how it's going to end. So I'm going to keep up with everything. But then in the evening, like Diana said, I'm excited to actually go to sleep before midnight, probably pour myself a glass of wine and just enjoy letting that stress kind of roll off of me. My favorite moment of this session was actually on the same day that Diana was mentioning, where we got together with all of our partners. Afterwards, Diana and I actually took a trip to P. Terry's and got some burgers, and then we went back over to the Capitol and we just had a little impromptu picnic on the grounds of the Capitol. And it was really nice because that was such a stressful, difficult day for a lot of people. So it was good to just kind of unwind and talk amongst ourselves. I think Diana and I definitely got really close this session. Not to get too sappy, but
No, yeah, that was nice. I forgot. I remember so fondly now.
Well, I know you guys are going to be doing a lot of sleeping post-session, it sounds like, but in the meantime, the legislators seem to have been sleeping kind of on the biggest issue that I think of the session, which is energy. So there's only really this weekend left. What are we going to do about our power? Glenn, where are we at with the power grid?
Where to start? They haven't really got much done to prevent power loss like we suffered during the freeze. They've done some window dressing. We've done some reorganization. And probably the most alarming thing they've done is they've made everybody whole. All of the energy companies, those at fault, all the natural gas companies who had failed to winterize their gas lines, all the people to blame with the companies involved, they're going to be made whole. You know who's not going to be made whole? Texas consumers. They're going to have to pick up the entire cost of several $1 billion in new kind of junk bonds that the state's going to get issued one way or the other to give the money to these companies. in return for what? The companies aren't really ordered or asked to do anything different than they were doing before the freeze. There's some window dressing, there's some talking points, but very little substantively has been done. And kind of the latest offense on this to me is that they've reached into the rainy day fund for $800 million for the gas companies. That's the rainy day fund that over the years they refused to touch for education and healthcare, for actual people's needs in Texas. But they'll reach into it to make their corporate lobbyist friends happy. And that's the latest sort of offensive thing the ledge has done on this topic.
Is there any chance that we're going to see like positive reforms by the end of session come out of the legislature?
I think it's too late to expect anything really substantive to be done. They're going to brag about this or that talking point that they included in the bills. They got, as a columnist for the Houston Chronicle, Chris Tomlinson put it, they've put makeup on the porcine. Another way of saying that is they've got a little lipstick on this pig. But beyond that, there's nothing substantive Texans will see to keep that kind of blackout from happening again.
I also think something else that's so important to mention was knowing about all of this inaction, especially, during this whole session, but especially after that explosive article came out from BuzzFeed. Shout out to BuzzFeed. Thank you so much for looking more into it than our own state of Texas did, where they estimated their estimations are about a bit over, instead of the 150 or so deaths that had been previously reported by the state as the guess of how many folks had died as a result of the winter storm, that the actual number is actually closer to about 700 people. And that's just really shocking. When reading it, looked like they did what sounds really smart, and I can't believe we hadn't, maybe looked in, other folks hadn't looked into it either, was comparing how many folks would typically pass away around that time compared to when the winter storm happened. And, when the state was comparing numbers for COVID deaths, it looks like they did the same thing too, in seeing how many more people died of COVID than would naturally. And it looks like that was the same method they used to come to that really high number.
And one thing that we saw within the past few weeks is there have already been warnings from ERCOT about a potential overwhelmed energy grid again with higher heat. And so that's something that during the summer, I think a lot of us are worried about, is our energy grid going to be able to handle the higher summer temperatures? And if you're sitting in your home sweating because your energy went out, you know who to blame. It was Texas Republicans who didn't take the steps necessary to prevent this from happening again. Even after they made promises, multiple promises were made by Governor Abbott and other Republican legislators after the winter storm saying they were going to prevent this from ever happening again. And the truth of the matter is they did not take the necessary steps to do that. And so it is almost inevitable that something similar could happen again. Maybe we won't have a 1 in 500 year winter storm, but with climate change, we know that those types of disasters are even more likely. And so it's so imperative that our state takes actions beforehand before it's too late.
Yeah.
I had one solution that if you see the numbers of lobbyists representing these big corporations involved in the blackout, I decided if it happens again, maybe we should put them in all the lobbyists, there were hundreds of them, put them in a human hamster wheel and let them generate power that way. Do something productive, literally.
That's
more productive than this session.
Yeah.
We've kind of got a threat of a special session looming over our heads, and I know a lot of us are talking about wanting to sleep, but we might not even get to do that. What can be done if we do see a special session? What do you think the legislator should focus on, and why, in terms of energy?
Top of mind for.
Go ahead, Wesley.
I was just going to say, top of mind for energy is just winterizing our system. Investing in the infrastructure in our energy grid to actually be able to handle these natural disasters that could be coming our way. And then also expanding healthcare, but I know that's not energy related, expanding Medicaid, but it still ties into this problem because there were probably a lot of folks who had health
Yes.
risks and outcomes from this disaster who were uninsured and weren't able to get the healthcare they needed as a result of what happened because of the winter storm. So it all really ties in together. Those would be much better priorities than what they're talking about focusing on.
Glenn, do you have anything to add before we
Well, they should have been, if they're gonna have a special session, and I don't really think they're gonna have one until the fall, but should they, I think they have to demand much more from the companies, from the energy companies than they are, because I don't think any real winterization is going to be done. I don't think much is going to happen, but everybody's bill's going to go up for 30 years, about $2 to $5 a month. And so if consumers are going to pay that to keep these companies whole, I think we should require the companies to do more than they're going to be required to do with regard to winterization and backup energy production, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I know Dan Patrick was the one that suggested a special session, or that he was going to demand one from Abbott, and Abbott's reaction was that was goofy, which is a funny way to describe Dan Patrick, who responded to that by saying, "Did he really say that?" Which I think all of us had that reaction as well. But this whole session's been goofy. All these right-wing legislators are goofy. I just hope if it's a special session, it doesn't continue to be goofy, but it looks like that's what it'll be, and that's using a kind word.
Yeah, that's probably one of the lower on the list of things I would use to describe Dan Patrick in terms of descriptors, but not all of them are appropriate for podcasts. But speaking of possibly being in the dark as things heat up over the summer, it seems like there was a lot of dark money that seemed to be coming into play at the legislature. Wesley, you want to tell us a little bit about what Progress did this week to kind of call out some of this dark money funneling into the legislature?
Yes, of course. And just to a quick disclaimer, Progress Texas, but specifically Amanda, she really did a lot of the heavy lifting on this because she was the one who drafted it. We filed complaints with the Texas Ethics Commission against the Heritage Foundation and Heritage Action for America, which are, conservative, out-of-state groups that are perpetuating Trump's big lie. And the complaint that we filed against them was because they failed to register as lobbyists during the 2021 legislative session. The thing about registering to be a lobbyist is you need to do that if you're involved in helping write legislation, communicating with lawmakers. There are a lot of specific rules that I'm not going to get into right now, but we believe that they broke those rules. And a couple of weeks ago, a video from Mother Jones was leaked showing Heritage Action's executive director bragging about writing legislation in states like Texas and Georgia and other swing states. And she actually flat out admitted that the group had pinned 19 provisions in House Bill 6, which is one of, the massive voter suppression bills, which has been turned into SB 7, but is potentially going to be signed into law by Governor Abbott. And so we filed this complaint because we believe it's important for Texans to know who's involved in writing their laws, especially if, these out-of-state dark money groups are the ones who are pushing this legislation.
Glenn, you've been through a couple of legislative sessions here. Have you seen this kind of dark money and this kind of backdoor deals happen before?
Oh, they've done it for a very long time. It's quite the regular practice to have lobbyists of one sort or another actually write the bills for members, and then those drafts will go through the staff and then the legislative council, which turns them into actual bills, but not at all unusual. And Republicans nationally have done this sort of thing on a big scale for really a couple of 3 or 4 decades, honestly, where one interest group or another will come up with an agenda and they'll do model legislation and hope that where they have the leadership of the states, they'll all do the same thing. I mean, we're seeing that on the voter suppression stuff is really remarkably consistent across the Republican states that are trying to do it or have done it. There's nothing, if they abide by the local lobby registration laws, there's nothing really. I mean, it's special interest control of our lawmakers. There's that, but it's not illegal as long as they register and follow the law about data lobbying and doing that sort of lobbyists and doing that sort of thing.
Sounds like some bad lobby integrity situation going on.
that might be redundant, bad
Yeah,
integrity
true.
in lobbying.
So I know a lot of us have watched that video of Jessica Anderson of Heritage Action for America, bragging about suppressing the vote in 8 different states. Were there any standout quotes or moments do you remember in that video that were really alarming to you?
I know for me, so definitely the part when she mentioned the 19 provisions that they pinned, but then also later on in the video, she discusses how the organization sent sentinels, which are just like actors, I guess, to testify on this model legislation, and also how they work to give it more of a grassroots vibe. And that was something that I think is really funny, because throughout this session, within our voting rights coalition work, a lot of the lawyers and the folks who are really it's not me, but a lot of the folks who are really knowledgeable about how to properly write legislation and how things should be worded, they've commented on how terribly written a lot of these bills are. And it's almost funny because from this video coming out, I'm almost wondering if that was purposeful. Like they made purposeful mistakes throughout the legislation just to make it look like, oh, it was really Briscoe Cain who wrote it and not actually Heritage Action or some of these big dark money groups. But that's neither here nor there. It could be that they're just incompetent as well.
I mean, and that would fit with Briscoe Cain's vibe as well. So a perfect pairing.
Very true.
That's a really good question you're asking me. I have to say the entire video spooked me because it looked for all the world like a movie villain,
Yes.
explaining to her minions just exactly how she'd destroyed democracy in America. Isn't that just a wonderful, happy thing? It was really, the tone was spooky that way to me.
It really just reminded me of Lion King with Scar talking to his hyenas, just a solid movie villain vibe. I'm surprised there wasn't any cackling in the room. Speaking of the bill that they had a lot to do with, Heritage Action had a lot to do with writing and moving forward. What's happening with it? What's happening with SB 7 right now?
That's a good question, Amanda. I wish we knew. We're laughing because a lot of the voting rights organizations, we've just been waiting patiently for the conference committee report to come out. The bill is currently in conference committee where lawmakers are basically negotiating behind closed doors, again, without public input, on what provisions are actually going to wind up in the final version of the bill before a last vote is taken in the House and Senate and it's sent to Governor Abbott for his signature. And the thing about that is, I mentioned before House Bill 6, which was this bill that the Heritage Foundation had a role in drafting. The language of House Bill 6 was added to Senate Bill 7 while it was in conference committee. And so now, or while it was in the House Elections Committee. And so now, while it's in conference committee, the original language of the bill could be added back into it. And I think what we're all warning reporters and a bit fearful of is that this bill could become this Frankenstein's monster of voter suppression that ties in, all of the worst components of both of those voter suppression bills. And so that's something that we're going to be watching for. Diana and me and Glenn and Amanda and the team here at Progress Texas are going to be working throughout the weekend this weekend because apparently the ledge doesn't believe in taking a weekend off. I would love for this bill to just die and nothing to happen with it, but unfortunately that's likely not going to be the case. So,
Diana, how do you feel about all of these negotiations and happening behind closed doors, dark money groups? It seems like a lot of this stuff is just happening outside the eyes of Texans.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a big part of filing that ethics complaint. I love that it's a complaint. It's called a complaint. We're complaining, like, hey.
We pulled a Karen.
Yeah. Yes, I'd like to see the manager. But specifically calling out this foundation and what it's doing. I think a big part of this process being so corrupt is that it's so far away and unattainable for regular folks to understand how these bills are drafted, how they get made. And I think most Texans are just left at the end of session wondering, okay, well, what happened? What's the result of it? And this starts, not just from it being a complicated process to begin with, but also at the start of the session where during a pandemic, way deep into it, they decided not to allow virtual testimony. So there have just been so many barriers this whole time from the start that have kept people out. And this was one way that Progress Texas really, is complaining like, hey, if you're going to do this, which I guess is legal, but still wrong, you didn't do this correctly, and really wanting to show who are these dark money, organizations that are writing the legislation. Like, I don't think most Texans would feel comfortable knowing that our laws are written by these outside groups that don't have our best interests in mind, that are going off of a conspiracy theory that's just wild. And, Wesley and I can definitely confirm that a lot of these decisions are made behind closed doors, as we were kicked out of a room trying to enter one earlier this legislative session during an elections committee meeting. Because, we're like, oh, obviously decisions are getting made, let's walk in. And they said no. So we got thrown out. But, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the people in this conference committee that are making these decisions, isn't it a panel or isn't it a group of white men?
So there are two separate conferences.
Okay.
There's the House conference and the Senate conference, and I believe the Senate conference is all white senators, but the House conference is a little bit more diverse. I think after the Senate conference was created, they got quite a bit of pushback because of the lack of diversity. So on the House side, they tried to do a little bit better, but still not great.
Yeah.
There was a time where these conference committees would actually meet at least some of the time in public. And they'd sit there and deliberate. They go section by section through the law and you'd hear one of them say, we'll go with a House on this, or we'll go with a Senate on that. Now, over time, it just evolved to where they never actually meet. What happens is language is sent from office to office, and they sort of round robin it that way. And to my knowledge, this one's not even gotten together to meet. They do negotiations from a distance negotiations, I guess you call it. I do want to highlight one thing because it's so obvious that's likely on the table. Don't know if it'll be in the final version, but the Texas Tribune's analysis about the reduced number of polling locations in minority areas and the increase in Republican voting areas completely reveals the motivations behind all of this, which is to intentionally discriminate against people of color. There's no other explanation for why you would reduce the number of polling locations where people of color are voting in the urban areas and increase them outside those areas. They try to say that, well, we want to standardize the numbers of polling places everywhere, but does that really make any sense? If you applied that, say, to freeways, then Houston would get one lane of Interstate 10, just like they have one lane out in far west Texas. It makes no sense that you would reduce the number of polling locations in an urban, large population area. I just like to point that out because it so reveals what is basically a racist motivation behind these bills.
It's almost like they missed the lesson on equity versus equality.
Good point.
Which is, another thing I wanted to bring up. It seems like a lot of these dark money groups and a lot of these far right conservative conspiracy theorists are trying to take out this critical component of diversity education. Diana, do you want to kind of talk about what's happening with those bills that are trying to remove education about diversity and racism from our schools?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, the same comparison can be made in trying to, and the fact that this is, that the voter suppression legislation is very racist legislation. And so is this attack on, so-called critical race theory, which what it actually is is a whitewashing of our history, an erasure of all of the contributions that people of color had made in history, and not just what the contributions we've made, but a lot of the atrocities that have happened throughout history. You know, if we don't learn from our history, we're doomed to repeat it. And, you know, unfortunately, I think that's a lot of what the far right wants us to know, and to not know our own history of our founding, and of the people inside of it. And a part of it is pushing, you know, this bill, not just through Texas, but in other states like Idaho and Tennessee. In Texas specifically, it's HB 3979. And again, it's a part of a widespread effort in different states, including Texas, to try to whitewash our history. And one of the reasons it's so critical that they want to push this terrible racist legislation, honestly, through in the state is because Texas is one of the largest textbook purchasers in the entire country. And we've known this especially because of our State Board of Education, that for the longest time was controlled by, you know, right-wing Democrats trying to indoctrinate our students and whitewash our history in that way. So we have this at the state level, even at the local level, with some local school board races also bringing in this language of trying to whitewash history and not have critical race theory in their schools, which is just all it is a complete history. They want to not give our students, kids an incomplete history. And what our students deserve the most is to see themselves reflected in their textbooks and to succeed, right? And so because we're one of the largest textbook purchasers in the country, a lot of what gets through in the TEKS, the Texas Assessment Knowledge and Skills here in the state of Texas, is what is copied and used in other states throughout the country. So there is a deep history of what they've been trying to do, and they really want to push this through in Texas to not just move the narrative and completely change our history, right, in our state, but also across the country.
So it seems particularly cruel to kind of, you know, there seems to be a lot of attacks on our young people and our students, you know, depriving them of critical education, attacking trans students. It seems like this session has just been particularly cruel and mean-spirited. Glenn, you know, you've been around for a couple of sessions here.
Thank you.
Yes, just a few. In your experience, have you seen this happen before? Is this,
No, I haven't. No, I have not. It is, as you say, with the cruelest, most mean-spirited and hate-filled. It seems like so many of the priorities of Republicans, especially Republican leaders, have simply been to figure out a way to hurt this group of people or hurt that group of people or punish this group of people or disenfranchise these particular voters. I mean, it's like they put targets on people and filed bills of hate against them. And I've never really seen it. Atlantic Monthly reporter asked me why I thought this had turned out this way. And I think it has to do with the 2020 election, but not the outcome of the election. You know, you're not really hearing a whole lot of Republicans say anything about President Biden here in Texas, really. I think it is the big lie, the lie that Donald Trump told and continues to tell that the election was stolen from him through fraud. And I think it's January 6th, the insurrection. And I think that has infected the sort of Republican Party at the grassroots level, and Republican elected officials are, for the most part, too cowardly to stand against it. And so it's a vicious circle. And I'm kind of glad this is drawing into the end, because if it continued longer, I'm afraid it would get worse, not better.
And I think, you know, Glenn, like you mentioned, he's been around for quite a few sessions. This is my third session. And so I haven't been around as long. This is the first session where I finally kind of didn't feel like a fish out of water. Like I finally started to understand, or I think maybe I just finally started to accept the chaos and understand that I was never going to actually know everything about the processes and how everything was going to function. But this session, if you ask anyone, like any decent person who's been following the legislator for a while, not just Glenn as a progressive who's in this work, but, even reporters who are covering all of this stuff. We've seen multiple stories come out talking about how this was one of the most cruel sessions that they've seen. And I think Glenn is so right. It's because these far right conspiracy theorists, they've been emboldened by Trump's presidency, and then everything that took place after that, they've seen that there haven't really been consequences after the insurrection. Today they just voted not to investigate it any further. The Senate Republicans blocked the measure. And so they're seeing all of this and they're thinking, oh, like that's working. We're going to pander to these far-right extremists and pass bills that they want, even though they know a majority of Texans don't want that, and it's more harmful in the end for our state. And I think that just proves why it's so important that we need accountability in our system. And that's what we were trying to do by filing this complaint against Heritage Action. That's like a common theme throughout this entire segment that we've been talking about. We need accountability for the winter storm and the energy disaster that happened afterwards. Otherwise, this stuff is just going to continue and our state is going to suffer for it.
Yeah, and even though the far-right leadership of Texas doesn't care about our power, I mean, they do, right? I think a lot of these attacks are as a result of the really great power that we have, and that's why they're trying to take it away, and that's why they did nothing as a result of, and they haven't as a result of the winter storm. But I think one of the really great things about Texans is showing how we reacted to the winter storm, helping each other, showing the power that we do have. And I'm really excited to see how we are going to come out of this, showing our resiliency, our people power, and fighting back against all of this hateful legislation.
Well, thank you, Diana. I couldn't agree more. I've been so impressed, one, with all of you, and I've really enjoyed my time helping out Progress Texas with this session. And I appreciate all that I've seen Texans coming out every week just to show their support of our rights, our civil rights. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining me today. Wesley, Diana, Glenn, it's always lovely to have you lend your expertise on all these issues. Everyone who's listening, thanks so much. And for those who are watching, thanks for tuning in live. If you would love to continue getting updates about Progress Texas, head on over to www.progresstexas.org and sign up to our email list and follow us on social. If you're listening to us on audio, you can subscribe to us on your favorite podcast. Thanks so much for joining, everybody, and have a good Friday. Hopefully we'll get some sleep on June 1st.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.